I will preach again. I will read from the Bible. Genesis chapter 1. Genesis, the word Genesis means the beginning of things, where things come from, where things begin. You know, for you to know the meaning of everything, you have to trace your steps all the way to the beginning. You have to find out where did all these things start, and how did you and me come here, and what is the purpose for you and me to be here. So the word of God says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. God creates the heaven and the earth before there was anything, before anything existed. The physical, I'm talking about the natural things, not God himself. You know, everything that you see or feel has a beginning. And that beginning, your mind and the mind of anybody or any natural being is confined to have a beginning. What do I mean? What I mean is that the natural is limited by time. It has a beginning and has an end. Talking about the things we see, the things we feel. They have a beginning and they have an end. But God himself has no beginning of days. He has no start of time or end of it. He himself created time. And it is time that confines you and me, the natural body, the flesh, the things that you can feel and see, confined by time. God created time, so he created the beginning. And so in the beginning of the things that you see, the things that are confined by time, the word of God says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. What is the heaven? The heaven is simply space. The things, the space, before there was stars and the heavenly bodies. Space, God created the space, and then the earth. And now the word of God proceeds to say, now after creating the heaven and the earth, that earth itself that God had created, in verse 2 it says, and the earth was without form and void. It did not have shape, and it was empty. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. There was no light. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. As these things just existed after God creating them, the heaven and the earth and the space, whatever was in heaven, that which is we call heaven, which is space. God was moving around. It tells you God was still moving before the beginning. God doesn't need the physical to move. He doesn't need time. He doesn't need to have a beginning. He was already moving. For everything to be, there had to be a power that exists forever, an eternal being. I told you in physics, there is a law of energy which says energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but can be transformed from one body to another. it cannot be created or destroyed. And that, as I said, proves that there is eternity. So I'm telling you, God was already there. His spirit was moving around. And after creating the heaven and the earth, he was moving. And as he moved, he looked. And it is recorded that the earth was without form, and it was void. And darkness covered the face of the deep. What is the deep? The deep is space. Darkness filled the space. And the earth itself did not have shape. There was no life in it. It is just like when you go to the other planets without life in them, like Mars. Empty, desolate, some extreme temperature, some very strong winds, no life. So the earth, which is one of the planets, was without life, was without shape. It was empty. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, whatever elements exist in space that already existed, that God had begun to create. He says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. What constitutes the earth and what constitutes the heaven, before God started putting the shape or putting the form or putting the light into the two, the heaven and the earth, what constitutes that? God had already formed that. Verse 3 says, God said, let there be light, and there was light. There was light. God created the light. And God himself is light. He said, let there be light. So there was light. Light is that which separates day and darkness. Daylight and darkness. Verse 4, God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God created the light. And then the light divides God divides the light from darkness. You know, darkness is just emptiness. When there is no light, it is called darkness. And what is the definition of darkness? Darkness is just emptiness. There is nothing in darkness. What is it that causes darkness? It is the absence of light. It is the absence of life, of sense. It is emptiness. It is like an empty space. No light, nothing, just extremely nothing. That is darkness. It is just like the empty space, the vacuum of space without the light. God called the light day. That is verse 5. And the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And you know what that which a man sees to be a day, to God it is 1,000 years. And that which is 1,000 years to a man, to God could be 1,000,000,000 years. That is the mystery of God, of who God is and how he perceives time. He is different. He is the creator. He created time. So it is the things we see that have a beginning, but himself has no beginning. And as I said, for everything to make sense, you have to trace the beginning. You know, sometimes people think and overthink, and they don't see the sense in everything. But for there to be sense, you have to look for your way to the beginning. You have to see where did the things come from. What am I here for? You have to see. God creates the things. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night, the emptiness. And the evening and the morning were the first day. God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, that which you call space. It is the heaven. And divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. 10. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called He seas. And God saw that it was good. So He continues to make the things on earth. And I'll talk from there as He continues to create, and the relevance of all these things that He creates, even to the point where He creates man and He creates a woman, all the way to where He rests. I will talk about all that, but as I have said, there was a beginning. And if there is a beginning, then it means there is a beginning of everything about you and me. When you think it is the end, begin to look back at the beginning. When you think there is nothing good about you, trace your way to the beginning. God can begin things in your life. God can begin to create in you. And you know the nature of God. He creates things where there is no form, where it is void, where it is emptiness, where there is no life in you, where it is extremely empty within you, where people are so broken and lost, where there is no hope, where people are destroyed and discouraged and heartbroken and taken captive by things. It is at that point that God creates things. He creates from the emptiness. When people are extremely empty, that is the basis that on which God can begin to create a man or a woman for Himself. So don't look at yourself that you are so empty, that you are so useless, that there is nothing that can happen about you. This is the promise from God to you, that version of yourself which is empty, without form and void, and is full of darkness. You know what darkness is? As I said, it is the emptiness. It is the lack of spirit, the lack of motivation and will to move ahead. Is the lack of that. Is the lack of the power to continue. Is the lack of purpose. Is the feeling of being useless. It is at that point that God can begin to say, let there be. I will reread the scriptures. Chapter 1 verses 1. In the beginning, there was a beginning. There can be a beginning of something in you that God can begin to create. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. This is the beginning. And the earth was without form. It did not have shape. There was no beauty about the earth for anybody to admire. There were no trees. There were no birds. There were no fish. There were no cows. There were no elephants. There were no grass. There was nothing that can be admired about the earth. It was without form. It was ugly, shapeless, and it was void, empty, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. It was very dark. And it is at this point that God begins to move. He moves. Where was he moving from? From his place. He had already created, or the place where he existed already was there. He was already existing, and he moved from his place. And it's written, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. God can move and cause things in you. And God said, let there be. When God now begins to speak, and he says, let there be lights, now you begin to see direction. You begin to see sense. Things begin to have meaning. You begin to have purpose. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. He puts the light, he introduces the light, and God called the light day, and the darkness he calls night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. This is how God works, and he proceeds to create things, to the point now that God is going to look around and say, it is good. That God saw everything to be good that he had created, and he was pleased with himself, with the work of his hands. God can look at the final product of you and say, it is good, and be pleased with that which has become of you. And it can be written down that what you will have become is good, is useful, because God began things in you, began a good work. I said I'll continue all the way to the end, where God creates the man.